So I wanted to give my thoughts on the Adrian Broner versus Adrian Granados fight. And my thoughts, pretty much in summary, is the wrong man won. I thought Granados not only outworked Broner, but outpunched him, outfought him, landed just significantly more shots than Broner. Broner was taking way too many breaks in the midst of his attack. There was a lot of times where Broner would hit Granados with a good shot or two. Granados almost always had an answer back for whenever that happened. Whereas whenever Granados hit Broner with some good solid shots, especially the right hand from the outside, which was frequently open for him, Broner didn't necessarily have that same answer back. And I mean, this is a thing that has gone on with Broner, for years now. Really, it's really just a part of who he is as a fighter. Almost kind of the same way that his overall lack of focus is pretty much a part of who he is as a fighter. It's part of who he is as a person, pretty much. I think if anything, that fantastic win over Antonio DeMarco is really more the anomaly as opposed to what we could expect from Broner in terms of an overall summary of who he is fighting wise. You know, it's just a case of that was just a fantastic night for him in particular. I'd say the Alec Verdia fight gets close to that as well. But I mean, otherwise, this type of style that Granados had was very tricky for Broner. He was able to box pretty well on the outside, especially early on, and then also mixed in a lot of good work on the inside where he was really smothering Broner. Broner did clinch a lot in order to, I think, try and break up Granados' rhythm in terms of switching from that outside to the inside and getting off a lot of those combinations, especially the body work on the inside. But I mean, it just kind of this fight really reminds me a lot of the first Leo Santa Cruz versus Carl Frampton fight and the Badu Jack versus James DeGale fight, where I'm guessing that the judges were pretty much just hypnotized by both the crowd reactions as well as just the flashy punches as opposed to the actual number of punches and overall damage that was being done landed. By pretty much primarily by Granados. I thought he won this fight 7 rounds to 3. I really can't see it much closer than that, maybe 6-4 for Broner. But like as I mentioned before, Broner's overall work rate and his good shots were just too few and far between. And even a lot of those flashy shots I thought were more of the slapping variety as opposed to really hitting Granados with a heavy shot and rocking him back or stunning him or anything. It seemed pretty much like he'd hit Granados with a shot. Granados would kind of have a big smile on his face like that wasn't shit. You didn't hurt me. And then Granados would come back with shots of his own. Whether it was a really hard single shot or a solid combination, just generally speaking. Broner did show pretty good defense at times, as he's prone to do at times. The thing with Broner, though, is he's either all on defense or all on offense, and I think that was something that Granados really took a lot of advantage of, by and large. The fact that he's either all on defense or all on offense, or that he's either moving his feet or moving his hands. He's not the type of fighter to really do two things at one time. He's not tremendous at cutting off the ring, and actually I think Granados could have even put the nail in the coffin in a much more emphatic fashion had he kept up with that sticking and moving style that he had really shown and shown to great effect early on in the fight. But if anything, I really think that he felt like, well, shit, Broner can't hurt me, so I'll take my chances and just bully him and bust him up on the inside, which I thought worked well as well. But I think if anything that other style might have potentially given him a better chance to win just by virtue of the fact of what judges seem to be scoring nowadays. It's really unfortunate that things like this keep happening with as much frequency as they do. Unfortunately for Granados especially, this is almost like the story of the man's career. He gets iffy decisions, loses iffy decisions against guys who are bigger names, who are A-side fighters. In comparison to him, happened against Felix Diaz, happened against Frankie Gomez, other fighters as well, and it happened against Kermit Cintron, although that was a draw. But it's just really unfortunate to see somebody that I thought performed every bit as well as Sean Porter, except he didn't get dropped. In comparison, to not be able to get the decision and to basically have his career still almost on the back burner. He's a very dangerous opponent. He's on the wrong side of that whole risk versus reward ratio. So it's really going to be tough for him to really get fights in the near future. I think that's a big part of the reason why he was had such a long layoff after the Imam fight. Like nobody really wanted to fight him. He could have potentially been the opponent for man, why am I forgetting his name now? The guy that Terrence Crawford beat 2 fights ago. What was his name? Victor Postal. Yeah, he had become the mandatory for Victor Postal, and Postal wound up fighting Crawford, of course, for the bigger money and everything, and the risk versus reward was a lot better for him in that regard. But it's just one of those things. Granados isn't gonna be a fighter you're gonna see necessarily a lot of these big name fighters fighting against unless he becomes a mandatory or some kind. It's really unfortunate. He's a really good fighter, a solid fighter, and a guy that can potentially beat any one of these top fighters on any given night. Very very difficult guy. Pretty well versed in a number of different fashions. As for Broner, I think a lot of people really got it twisted with regard to the man because, in spite of the fact that a lot of people praise it without a doubt how good he was as a lightweight, I think that by this time in his career, regardless of whether he had eating problems or not, weight problems or not, I think he would have outgrown lightweight anyway. I mean, a lot of people forget how he missed the weight in the Vicente Escobedo fight by I think 2.5 or 3.5 pounds or something like that. It was crazy. And like when you're draining that much to make 130, it probably means that you're draining a good bit to make 135 as well, which I think has kind of proven to be the case since then. And in spite of the fact that I do think that he probably would be optimal at 140, I just don't think that he has the discipline enough to live the fighter lifestyle and clean up his diet enough. Because I'm sure that he works just fine in training camp and in training and stuff. I've seen some of the stuff that he does in training. I mean, in spite of the fact that he does seem to coast at times, even in training, which kind of translates into his fights as well. Although it's translated throughout all of his fights, even in his best performances. I just think that it's probably more of a diet issue with him as opposed to a burning calories issue. It's what he's eating basically. But as for him as a welterweight, which I'm pretty certain that he's going to be from now on, and he pretty much has been for the past couple of years, it's not going to look good for him. If anything, I think what's going to wind up happening is they're going to eventually feed him to somebody like an Errol Spence. Use Broner's name to capitalize and build a new star. Who Spence is starting to become a budding star. He's starting to be thought of in the way that Broner was a few years back. Albeit at welterweight as opposed to Broner back at lightweight. But that's tends to be how the things go in the sport of boxing. When one fighter is kind of used up and done with it, you gotta use him in order to sow the seeds for the next generation. It's like almost like fertilizer. When the animals die, they become fertilizer for the new plants, and the animals then eat those new plants. The circle of life, so to speak. Quick rundown of the undercard, though. Lamont Peterson managed to get a pretty good unanimous decision over David Avanesian. I thought he looked a little bit iffy at the start. I didn't think that he was boxing as well as he could. I don't know. It just seemed a little bit slow to start. Avanesian was doing some pretty good work on the inside. But I think as the rounds kind of told on, Peterson's body work started to make a bit of a difference, as well as the fact that, Avanesian, it seemed like he didn't necessarily have the best gas tank, just generally speaking. And especially from the mid rounds on into the late rounds, I thought Peterson was able to pretty much take control of the fight and win it pretty cleanly. I pretty much agreed with the way the judges had it. One judge had it 115, 113. Two of them had it 116 to 112. I thought the 116, 112 for Peterson was pretty much on point. That's pretty much what I had it. And, just a solid job from Peterson, He's now the mandatory for the winner of the Danny Garcia versus Keith Thurman fight. And honestly, I think he's a very intriguing opponent for either of them, whether it happens to be a rematch with Danny Garcia. And I think Garcia's healthier at 147 than he was back at the catch weight that he fought Peterson at. And, even against Thurman, if Thurman happens to defeat Garcia, I think that Peterson, especially the way that he digs to the body, could be something that's very problematic and troublesome for somebody like Keith Thurman. But I mean, either way, I think he's a fantastic opponent for either of them, and I'm definitely looking forward to that fight. In light of that, as well as just that's a great fight, just period, point blank. It's one of the more anticipated fights that's already signed for this year. But otherwise, I mean, props to Lamont Peterson, did a really solid job. And as for David Avanesian, back to the drawing board for him. But he's a pretty tough fighter, pretty gritty fighter. I'm sure we'll probably see him in the near future. Maybe probably be used as a gatekeeper for the near future. I think his style is safe enough for a lot of these guys to be built up against. He doesn't have like lights out power that like he might be able to knock out your prospect out of nowhere. He's just kind of a tough, solid fighter, and I'm sure he'll probably get a few nice paydays in order to build up some of these younger budding stars' careers at welterweight. And then, of course, the first fight on the card, which was Marcus Brown versus Thomas Williams Jr., and it looked like Thomas Williams' little streak came to an end. Marcus Brown managed to knock him out in the sixth round, wound up breaking his jaw. And Brown just did a solid job. Pretty much just used the boxing fundamentals in order to outbox Williams. He just stuck that jab out, and that was pretty much all she wrote. As soon as he started sticking that jab out, I knew it was pretty much over. I had favored Brown going into this fight, especially because I felt like Williams was just a little bit too wild, a little bit too much hands down. And, Brown, in spite of a lot of the shit that he caught for his last fight, that split decision win that a lot of people thought Kalajczyk, I think is how you say his name, actually beat him for. I still felt like Brown just overall was just a better boxer than Williams. He was going to be able to control everything, and he wasn't going to get into the type of firefight that Williams needed to draw him into in order to have a shot at potentially scoring a knockout of his own. And Brown just pretty much boxed off the back foot, stuck that jab out there, hit him with a lot of clean left hands, a lot of clean left crosses, and pretty much that just basically outboxed Williams. With just the basics, the fundamentals, the 1-2, the jab, and the left cross, and just a clean knockout for Marcus Brown, showing a little bit of that promise that I had seen from him before his last fight. He managed to show that off just a bit better in this fight than he did in the previous one. But that's pretty much it for me with regard to this card, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.